Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two guests. Firstly, by our regular guest from the Socialist Group in the SNP. We have Chris McCusker. Chris, how are you this evening?
Good evening, Kenny. Nice to be here.
And on this side of me, we have former SNP MP and now Director of the Momentous Change organisation, Roger Mullen. Roger, how are you today?
I'm just grand. Thanks very much, Kenny.
Excellent. Well, we start this evening with our regular coronavirus update, and as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there had been a total of 65,125 coronavirus tests concluded. Of these, 52,416 tests were confirmed negative, and 12,709 tests were positive. 89 patients were in intensive care last night, with 79 of those having tested positive. And there were a total of 1,204 people in hospital with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19 cases. Both of those mark a fairly substantial decline over the last day or two. There is an increase, though, of 272 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 1,703. This number, though, only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 30,076 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 649. This number does now refer to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. Also today, National Records of Scotland published their weekly analysis. As at the 3rd of May, 2,795 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate. Between the 27th of April and the 3rd of May, 523 deaths relating to COVID-19 have been registered, a decrease of 135 from the previous week. Deaths involving COVID-19 as a proportion of all deaths rose from 16% a month ago and rose rapidly to 36% in the week before last, but has fallen to 31% in the past week. The total number of deaths registered in Scotland from the 27th of April to the 3rd of May was 1,673, 594 or 55% more than the average number of deaths registered in the same week over the last 5 years. This is a decrease of 163 from the number registered the previous week. Of these 594 excess deaths, 83% were deaths where COVID-19 was the underlying cause. And more than half of all registered deaths involving COVID-19 last week occurred in care homes, 59% compared to 52% in the previous week. And although that percentage has increased, the actual number of deaths in care homes has gone down from 339 to 310. And our first story tonight, Broadcasting Scotland can exclusively reveal poll results which show the SNP with commanding leads for both Holyrood and Westminster elections. The poll, by panel base and commissioned by the campaigning website Wings Over Scotland, with Don't Knows excluded, shows the SNP on 50% in the Westminster voting intention, with the Tories second on 26%, Labour on 17%, the Liberal Democrats on 5% and the Greens on 2%. At Holyrood, again with Don't Knows excluded, the SNP recorded 53% on the constituency vote. The Tories were again second with 23, Labour third on 15, the Lib Dems on 5 and the Greens on 3. And on the regional list vote, the SNP scored 48%, the Tories 22, Labour 15, the Lib Dems 7 and the Greens 5%. These commanding leads for the SNP in a panel-based poll seem to reinforce results seen in a YouGov poll at the weekend, which produced very similar results. In terms of seats, the Electoral Calculus website suggests 6 SNP gains at Westminster for a total of 54 seats, with the Liberal Democrats being wiped out in Scotland and 2 Tories losing their seats as well. Ian Murray, the sole Labour MP in Scotland, would be expected to retain his seat. At Holyrood, electionpolling.co.uk calculates that on these numbers the SNP would take 74 seats for an overall majority of 19. The Tories would fall to 27 seats, Labour to 18, the Lib Dems would gain 2 seats, moving to 7, and the Greens would fall to 3. The poll had a sample size of 1,086 Scottish adults and was conducted between the 1st and 5th of May. And Roger, if I could come to you first on this, these are really startling results for a party that has been in government in Scotland now for 13, how many? Yeah, 13 years. What do you make of these poll results we've seen this week?
Well, obviously they're spectacularly good polls for the SNP, and anybody who supports the SNP will be quite rightly delighted. Well, there's got to be a word of caution, however. We're a long way out from any election, and so I wouldn't take this as any prediction of what is likely to happen next year or at Holyrood elections. At the moment, a lot can happen, and a lot is happening. In some ways, there is one aspect of it that I would be interested in further research, and it's this related to the current crisis. Quite often when governments are facing a really big crisis and the public recognise it's a very big crisis, if they are seen to perform competently, they tend to gain further support. People rally to governments who are facing crises so long as they demonstrate competence. So it would not surprise me if an element of this poll is because I think the communication from the Scottish Government has been good in recent weeks.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that perhaps as we move maybe out of lockdown, maybe some of these measures start to get lifted, and we start to kind of look at the aftermath and potentially, a really serious economic crisis that we then have to work our way out of? Do you suspect that may in turn have a negative effect on the government, given that, as you say, people will rally to a government in a time of crisis, but when things drag on, when things become really difficult economically, people tend to look for some sort of change?
Well, I think one thing to be learned from this experience in the last few weeks is the way in which, if you're honest and admit uncertainties and you communicate well with the public, that rebounds on the whole to your credit. And too often in the past, I think all parties have made the mistake of thinking, I've always got to appear as if I'm absolutely certain and I know precisely what's going to happen and I'm the only one with an answer. And the public can see through that. And so I think the way in which the communication has been undertaken, the way in which the Scottish Government have been more open, a lot more open in Westminster about what's happening. They've been a lot more open about the uncertainty, but they've been explaining to people how they're going about the task. I think that is to their credit. And those communication lessons can be carried on into the future, in my view.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, just quite quickly from you, we've seen in this poll as well, the numbers for independence were exactly 50-50 between yes and no. Obviously, once don't knows were excluded. Do you think there is an issue in Scotland where we have roughly half the population want independence and therefore feel that they can only really vote for the SNP or potentially the Greens? And so the competition for votes in Scotland is maybe a wee bit less vigorous than it would be in a country that didn't have that really strong divide on one really major question.
Well, you will not be surprised, Kenny, if I lament the fact that the left within Scotland is completely fractured, and therefore we don't have a credible socialist party which has no ties to Labour, and I would be hopeful of that socialist party having a lot of ties to an independent Scotland. But that aside, and I think hopefully my dream is that will come with independence. The question I've been asking since 2014 is, could socialism be the truck for independence, or will independence deliver us to a socialist Republic of Scotland? But if I can go back to these figures, as welcome as they are, and possibly augment what Roger was saying, that the the fluidity of people's confidence in a government, and Nicola has been doing absolutely wonderful, and we can see comparisons being drawn with, I forget the leader's name, the New Zealand Prime Minister.
Jacinda Ardern, yeah.
And as well as Angela Merkel as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Nicola is definitely rubbing shoulders with the hoi polloi of the rest of the world. But what I was actually going to suggest is that this new app that is coming out in relation to COVID-19, I recently put out on Twitter just a question as to the uptake of this app, if it has got any connection to Dominic Cummings or Cambridge Analytica. Will we see the lack of uptake of this app as being, could we actually see this as being a deep distrust of the Westminster establishment? And that would then give us another indication as to possibly some of the soft no voters, who do have a deep mistrust of the dealings at Westminster.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question, and one that I believe there may be questions in this poll as yet unpublished. We will, of course, leave that to Wings Over Scotland to publish themselves. We do have to move on just now, but down in London, Boris Johnson has signalled that some lockdown measures in England will be eased on Monday, as he set a new target of 200,000 tests a day by the end of the month. In his first PMQs since recovering from the coronavirus, Johnson said he would give a statement on Sunday on plans for an unlockdown, with a view to making the changes on Monday. Possible areas for change could be allowing more outdoor activities and making clear ways in which businesses could get employees back to work with looser physical distancing. A review of the lockdown will be carried out tomorrow, but the Prime Minister said the data which would contribute to the easing of physical distancing measures was still coming in, which was why he had decided to release information to the public over the weekend. He said people needed to know the day before what would change on Monday the 11th of May. Johnson said there would be the opportunity for the Commons to debate and interrogate him or the government at a later date, in a hint that he may try to dodge appearing before Parliament to answer questions himself next week. However, a spokesman for Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, said, "We are very clear that the PM should be making a statement to the Commons. It is his plan, his proposal, and it should be him. We will be expecting him in the chamber on Monday." And Roger, this announcement that Boris Johnson plans to reduce or relax some of these lockdown measures on Monday does seem to fly in the face a wee bit of the data, which says that we're still in the middle of quite a serious epidemic problem. What do you think of this, and do you expect Boris Johnson to make big moves this weekend?
Well, I think if he makes big moves this weekend, it will be absolutely ridiculous. The data, all the data that I've pored over, I don't see where there is the headroom to do anything significant. And that's at a UK level, let alone at a Scotland level. There remains a major issue to be tackled, as we all know, in care homes. We know that there are some communities, for example, in Scotland, like Inverclyde, that have been particularly hard hit. And therefore, I think there is a lot of questions will have to be asked about why, if there are significant moves, why they're being made now. And secondly, why they're being made with effectively 1 day's notice without scrutiny. My understanding is that certainly as of yesterday, there had been no detailed discussion with the four administrations, the three devolved administrations, and Westminster and the UK. And therefore, this is going to be sprung on everybody, it would seem. And I don't think that's the way to do this. I think if you look at some of the examples of other countries, there was much more of a lead-in period. the type of discussion that Scotland is trying to have with the people in publishing their documents. And I think what this signals is if Boris Johnson does that, he's willing to do it without any consultation of any meaningful sort and without any real scrutiny. And I think that would be an extremely bad move.
Yeah, and Chris, we've talked quite a lot on the show in the last few weeks about the disconnect between this four nations approach that essentially seems to mean following what London says. And now we're hearing, as Roger says, we're talking about Boris Johnson announcing on Sunday what's going to happen on Monday. And presumably then they would expect the devolved nations to follow in lockstep, as we've been hearing so many Tory politicians ask for. What's your take on this? Do you expect to see any consultation with the devolved governments? Do you expect, or what do you expect to come out of this move by Boris Johnson?
Well, for a start, I don't see any consultation happening. That's the way that the Tory government operates. The SNP parliamentary group have been asking for detailed inclusion into a number of issues, and it's just not been forthcoming. We've seen earlier on in the week, for the third time, Joanna Cherry was asking Priti Patel about the arrangements at airports for people to be tested, and 3 times she has absolutely blanked her. So I don't see any co-working coming out of this. And I think, as Roger quite rightly says, I think he's going to shoot himself in the foot if he carries on with this. Interesting as well is that Nicola, again, has been consistent by, again, today in FNQs, excuse me, to Jackson Carlaw, that with regard to the foreign nation approach, is that there has to be evidence for a foreign nation approach to work, and there has to be evidence for doing things at our own pace. And, she basically reiterated the fact that she will not be railroaded into doing something on a foreign nation basis if the evidence categorically proves to her that it is not in the best interests of the people of Scotland. Mm-hmm. And that is where Nicola is going to bolster her support.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about this on Sunday and on Monday, but we will move on just now. The SNP has criticised the UK government over spiteful guidance, which warns that applicants for universal credit will automatically lose their tax credits, even if their universal credit application is rejected. The guide published by the DWP explains that not all tax credit recipients will be eligible to receive universal credit. If you claim universal credit, your tax credit claim will be closed, even if you aren't eligible to receive universal credit. The UK government has also refused to give guidance on which benefit people should be claiming, stating, DWP and HMRC cannot advise whether claiming universal credit or tax credits will be better for you. The House of Commons detailed this issue in a survey on people's experiences of the benefits system during the coronavirus outbreak, including concerns that people who were already claiming working tax credits told us that it hadn't been made clear to them that making a claim for universal credit would automatically stop their existing benefits. And Roger, we've discussed a couple of times recently on the show some of the problems that people are having with the welfare system during this crisis. But this is a pretty appalling one, isn't it? Where just the act of applying for a different benefit will cause you to get will cause your previous claim to get shut down, and you're then left with nothing potentially if you're not eligible for universal credit. What do you make of this announcement from the DWP?
I agree with you. It's appalling. And I think your own lead-in comments, Kenny, demonstrated how it's even worse than just losing a benefit. The very fact that these institutions are not willing to provide guidance to people on what is in their interest, effectively saying not allowing people to know what their rights are in this situation. So I think this is deeply concerning. It's very difficult to see it in any way other than they want to save as much money as possible. And if that means that a lot of poor and vulnerable people suffer, they seem quite willing to tolerate that. Particularly in the midst of crisis, the attitude that should be taken is precisely the opposite of that. It should be to try and be helpful for people, to help them live through this crisis. So it's very difficult not to see this anything other than a quite appalling policy move in the UK government's part.
Yeah, Chris, this is Bob Doris that's been kind of taking a lead on this. And that, as Roger said, that line that the DWP cannot advise you what the best benefit is for you. I mean, why is the DWP not able to do that?
Well, the DWP have categorically said, I think it was last year, possibly the year before, is that is what the Citizens Advice Bureau is for. And they have got no time to counsel and advise people as to what would basically benefit them. I hate to use that word, benefit. Mm-hmm. And I mean, what this is basically an abdication of responsibility, and it's culminated in a pernicious attack of vulnerable people who are needing money and are not being guided to that. Now, anecdotally, we have heard in years and years gone by of people who, know how to work the system, and in order to get X, Y, and Z. And if nobody sort of like teaches you that, at an early school age, Rab C. Nesbitt being a point in question, then you will constantly be on what they give you. Now, I know from a carer's point of view that there are many benefits out there that carers can apply for. It's not necessarily correct that they're going to get it, but they can apply for it, and they can apply for extra grant funding and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. But the DWP don't tell you about the fact that if you are migrated onto one benefit from an old benefit, then you will naturally have to wait until that new benefit turns up. You don't stay on your original benefit. You lose for the number of weeks that you are waiting for this new benefit if you successfully migrate from one to the other. Point in question, my own predicament is the fact that I'm on the what is called income support, the old income support as well as carers allowance. Now, if you're on carers allowance and income support, that precludes you from applying for universal credit. You're not allowed. They will just not even contemplate you applying for universal credit, even although the fact that one job centre worker quietly told me in the strictest of confidence not to apply for universal credit and stay as you are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we do advise you if you are in any of these kind of situations, do contact your local Citizens Advice Bureau. They can advise. It is obviously unfortunate that the DWP feel that they can't. Moving on, though, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor has said that the UK government must look to strengthen and address serious gaps in support, rather than rolling back and winding down schemes. It comes after reports that the UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak plans to wind down the UK government's coronavirus job retention scheme, and after the Health Secretary also said that the UK government must wean off struggling businesses from the scheme. Commenting, Alison Thewlis MP said, "Rather than rolling back and winding down the government's job retention scheme, the Chancellor must instead look to strengthen the measures and address the gaps in support so no one is left behind or pushed further into hardship. Businesses have been hit hard by this pandemic and many are facing an uncertain financial future. For the Health Secretary to talk about weaning off struggling businesses is deeply concerning, with HMRC revealing that over 800,000 companies with over 6 million workers are applying to use the scheme. It's vital the UK government does not take premature steps to wind down measures. And Chris, you know, we've talked a lot about the failures of the UK government in getting good support to people at times, but now already they're talking about weaning people off, that they're worried about people and businesses getting dependent on this support. Now, clearly, people are dependent on this support while they're not allowed to open their businesses. Looking back to that story we talked about with Boris Johnson talking about opening up the lockdown, do you think this is part of the same movement where the government wants to spend less money, wants to get people back to work and relying on themselves and the old kind of Tory ideology, rather than keeping the economy shut while we deal with the crisis?
Well, there's a horrible saying at the entrance of the Auschwitz camp in Germany, and that can equally apply to the Tory party, I'm afraid. The reduction of this 80% down to 60%, whilst they are, I just can't get my head around it, because they are taking money away from people who need it, desperately depend on it in order to save what is left of their businesses, no matter how many employees they have had to shed, or may still have to shed, because make no mistake, you know, to reduce the furlough by 20% will result in companies going to the wall and companies enforcing redundancies. And, you know, they're doing this at the same time, handing out sums in the region of 300 million to airlines who pay very little tax into the UK Treasury. One report today I'm absolutely shocked to hear is the fact that the government are giving money to Wizz Air, who are a Hungarian company, just because they qualify, and Wizz Air have taken advantage of it because of the low interest rates that are being offered to them. I find that absolutely heinous that they would give that amount of money away to, and no disrespect to Hungarians or Wizz Air, but there are people in this country that need that money first, not multi-conglomerate airlines that have enough money. It has been proven Wizz Air is the most fluid, one of the most fluid companies out with Qantas, which can actually operate for about 19 months, I believe, was quoted, without any government involvement whatsoever, such as the liquidity of the company. And yet they are taking advantage of this scheme in order to rake in more and more money. It's the exact same thing that Branson wants to do. It's the exact same thing that O'Leary wants to do as well. And the Tories will take care of big business rather than take care of its citizens that need this money, and they need it now.
And Roger, I mean, similar kind of point to you. It's not much good to cut the financial support that you give to people in theory to incentivize them to get back to work when it's not legal for them to get back to work. It does seem like just a punitive measure to start cutting that job retention scheme support.
Yes, and to be honest, I'm surprised of this move. What we have to understand is that moving into this huge recession that we face because of the action is what's known by economists as a supply side issue. It's not a typical falling of demand that's creating this problem. It's the deliberate and quite understandable closing down of the economy, the shutting of businesses by the the mandate of government. Government have chosen, for the sake of the health crisis, to close business. It's already destroyed the profitability of many sectors. Companies have already closed. I think it's absolutely right to say if they do this to the furlough, what's going to happen is simply it's going to lead to more redundancies. It's going to make it much more difficult for companies to recover and to come back from this. So it's potentially deeply damaging to the economy on top of the lockdown that they've had to face. So it's difficult to see this as anything other than the fact that they see it as a way of trying to save a bit of money and for themselves because it's been successful. The reason it's been successful is because they've closed down the economy and there was no option for many employers. And what we've got to remember is in Scotland, most of the people who are employed in Scotland are employed in the private sector through small businesses, not big corporations. And it's these small businesses that are going to suffer the most and find it most difficult to recover. So I think it's, again, deeply worrying, very short-sighted from an economic policy point of view.
Yeah. We would just remind you, if you want to comment on any of these stories, you can join us on Twitter. You can follow us at Broadcast Scot, and you can use the hashtag Scotland@7 to be part of the discussion. But moving on now, SNP MP Mhairi Black has called on the UK government to increase employment support allowance, given they have recognised the need for an increase in universal credit, and they refuse to discuss the possibility of a universal basic income. At PMQs today, the MP for Paisley and Renfrewshire South urged the Prime Minister to increase ESA, adding that if he will not, why does he feel that people who are sick or have a disability require less support at this time? Boris Johnson responded by pointing out that the DWP has removed the 7-day waiting time for ESA, but the SNP has said that this does not go far enough. ESA, alongside Job Seekers Allowance, is a legacy benefit for those not moved to universal credit, and is for those with a disability or health condition that affects how much they can work. And Roger, coming back to you again, I mean, we've talked about this at length on the show, the problems with people on legacy benefits, the problems of people migrating to universal credit, and the differences that those leave behind. Is it just that the people on these legacy benefits are now a smaller group, and the government just think they can get away with ignoring them?
I don't know if it's particularly that. I mean, the big disappointment for me is the government just setting their face completely against any consideration of reforming completely the system and giving people a proper wage, as it were. So but part of the problem here is also how they view people who are in the greatest need. I mean, the people who are disabled and the like in our society today face, under the current circumstances, an even bigger burden. I mean, Chris will know better than myself, but for example, a lot of them have lost their support from carers. They're having to find ways of caring for themselves that's different from the way in which they're used. This is, I would have thought, bound to lead to additional stress and additional cost. And for them to be denied proper support at this time just strikes me as being close to completely immoral. Yeah,
unfortunately, we do have to move on. I would love to get a comment from you, Chris, but we're running a wee bit over schedule tonight. Don't worry, there's plenty more for you to talk about later. But analysis work from the University of Glasgow Centre for Virus Research provides evidence that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes the COVID-19 infection, has not mutated into different types. Recent research had suggested that more than one type of SARS-CoV-2 was now circulating in the pandemic, with one strain being more aggressive and causing more serious illness than the other. Now, using analysis of virus samples from the pandemic, scientists have been able to show that only one type of the virus is currently circulating. Their research is published in the journal Virus Evolution. Viruses, including the one causing COVID-19, naturally accumulate mutations or changes in their genetic sequence as they spread through populations. However, most of these changes will have no effect on the virus biology or the aggressiveness of the disease they cause. Earlier this year, it was reported that scientists had found 2 or 3 strains of SARS-CoV-2 circulating in the population, evidenced by certain mutations that had been detected. However, thanks to extensive analysis of the virus genomes annotated by the University of Glasgow Centre for Virus Research's COV-GLUE resource, scientists at the University of Glasgow have demonstrated that these mutations are unlikely to have any functional significance and, importantly, do not represent different virus types. COV-GLUE is a specialised virus database developed at the University of Glasgow, which enables large numbers of coronavirus samples to be collected, organised and analysed according to their evolutionary mutations. And meanwhile, a genetic analysis of samples from more than 7,500 people infected with COVID-19 suggests the new coronavirus spread quickly around the world late last year and is adapting to its human hosts, according to research published today from the University College London Genetics Institute. The study found almost 200 recurrent genetic mutations of the new coronavirus, which the researchers said showed how it may be evolving as it spreads in people. Francois Balloux, a UCL professor who co-led the research, said results showed that a large proportion of the global genetic diversity of the virus causing COVID-19 was found in all of the hardest hit countries. That suggests that the virus was already being transmitted extensively around the globe from early on in the epidemic. And Chris, we've been talking about this on the show since January. The first official announcements coming out of China that there was human-to-human transmission came in January. But we know now that at least some cases were found elsewhere in late December. And now we're hearing that this research shows the virus was a lot more widespread than we thought late last year. What do you make of all this research that's coming out now?
Well, I mean, having no medical background, but, in saying that, I feel like I've just actually done a 3-year doctorate. The amount of information that, I've taken in. But the collaboration that we can see, earlier on we talked about this 4-nation approach. And bear with me when I bring this up, because I think it's quite important that there seems to be a great amount of collaboration within the universities, not just in Scotland, but in England and Wales as well, Northern Ireland. And that's where we can see the greatest collaboration. And that undoubtedly is in conjunction with their friends in Europe as well. And what I can't understand for the life of me is that when you have the COVID updates from the UK government, there is no scientific evidence in it whatsoever. They don't refer back to previous findings or work that's ongoing or this is connected to that routine. Whereas if you listen, obviously, to the Scottish COVID update, there is a lot of technical information in there, and that involves, having that grown-up conversation that Nicola first talked about. And it seems to me that, with all this information that we have now, and I think that we actually have more information on COVID than what we did have, back in the days of SARS and back in the days of Ebola. That is obviously it's a good thing, but it should be, more widely reported. And if people have got an issue with taking in information, then that's their own problem. But at least you then can't turn around and say, well, we didn't. Don't say that we didn't tell you, because we did.
Yeah. Well, Broadcasting Scotland will always try to be ahead of the curve. We have talked to a couple of researchers just this week. So, and we're reporting, as I say, on the research that we do get in. So, always come to Broadcasting Scotland for your best form of news, I say. Moving on though, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia will open their borders to each other's citizens from May the 15th, creating a Baltic travel bubble within the European Union amid an easing of pandemic restrictions. It's a big step towards life as normal, Estonian Prime Minister Jüri Ratas wrote on Twitter. The Baltic travel area would be the first of its kind in the bloc, where most countries restricted entry to non-nationals and imposed quarantine on incoming travellers as the coronavirus spread across the continent. Citizens of the three countries will be free to travel within the region, but anyone entering from outside will need to self-isolate for 14 days, Lithuanian Prime Minister Saulius Skvernelis said. We showed a good example by stating very clearly that only countries which successfully dealt with the situation can open themselves up, he added. I think we will keep to this principle when dealing with countries where the situation is very bad, which did not take measures to control the virus spread. Poland and Finland could be the next countries to join the free travel bloc, said Skvernelis. The European Commission has recommended that internal border controls between all member states should be lifted in a coordinated manner once their virus situation converges sufficiently, the Commission's office in Lithuania has said. And Roger, this little move from the Baltic states, now obviously they're quite small, they've always worked quite closely together, but it does show that there are opportunities for smaller entities to take action where maybe the whole EU, maybe a 27-nation approach isn't necessarily right for the whole bloc.
Yes, I think you have to be very careful here. And I think we've got to respect the rights of countries throughout the world to analyse the data as it affects them and what makes sense in their situation. I mean, as you were reporting in that, Kenny, the thing that struck me was that you were reporting that although they were changing some of the internal controls, relaxing those, the external controls have been put in place in a way that we have not seen that here. And one of my continuing concerns is the inflow of people from countries where there's quite a lot of COVID-19 into the UK, and we've not been testing, we've not been quarantining and the like. And I know that there's been messages from the UK government say, oh, but the numbers are quite small and in comparison with the spread in the community wouldn't have added anything significant. Well, I just don't buy that, because what we do know is that things are very marginal as to whether, for example, the R number is going to reach 1 or not. And I think we've been unwise not to follow the example of, for example, New Zealand, which is often quoted, and the way in which they have significant controls. And so I think even at the UK level, we have not had sufficient border testing, quarantining of people. And that would be my view in that. So obviously we wish the countries like Latvia and Estonia well, but I don't know that their situation directly transfers to us here because of those differences about external controls.
Sure, of course. And also in Europe today, Chancellor Angela Merkel today announced a range of steps agreed with Germany's 16 federal state leaders to ease the coronavirus lockdown, saying the first phase of the pandemic had passed, although there was still a long way to go. We are at a point where our goal of slowing the spread of the virus has been achieved, and we have been able to protect our health system, so it has been possible to discuss and agree on further easing measures, Merkel told reporters. People from 2 households will be allowed to meet, and more shops will open, provided hygiene measures are in place, but guidelines on keeping a distance of 1.5 metres and wearing mouth and nose masks on public transport remain. There are also plans for top-flight football to resume in Germany, with games in the Bundesliga due to begin on May 15th after all players have completed a short quarantine. This will make Germany the first major league in Europe to restart after football was suspended across the continent at the beginning of the epidemic. And Chris, I see you've got your Liverpool shirt on, so come to you on the football question. First of all, how welcome do you think it'll be to have German football back on the telly?
Well, I mean, it'll certainly give you something to watch. I mean, I've been watching Belarusian football. They've not taken a break. They've just ramped on with it. And although the quality is absolutely rank, it's still a game of football. And I'm although Liverpool and Celtic and all of this, but I will watch Alloa via Broth purely because it's football. And I don't buy into this mince of thing like Celtic fans don't watch Rangers, and vice versa. A load of crap. It's football. It's the game, and that's what's here. But going back to what you were saying earlier on about Angela Merkel. It's interesting that they're actually further relaxing, because I read reports last week that she had, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that she had sort of like gradually allowed big industry to return, i.e., factories reopening. And then, shortly within about 5 days of that happening, there seemed to be an upsurge in the
new cases,
reported cases of coronavirus. So I'm slightly worrying that she's maybe buckling to pressure, and I mean the capitalism will obviously want to put pressure on any government, for a return to industry, in order that it can start getting the wheels working again and stuff like that, and it can generate money. But at what point do we consider the best interests of capitalism against the best interests of human life?
Yeah, of course. We will obviously keep tracking what's happening in Germany. It does provide us with an interesting model, perhaps, to look at for our own future. But back in London, SNP MP Owen Thompson has called on the UK government to release information on the number of inquiries made under the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme to understand how well the scheme is working. The call follows a number of written parliamentary questions to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy from the Midlothian MP on how many applications under the scheme have been approved and rejected. The department failed to provide an answer on how many applications had been rejected, saying that the British Business Bank Systems only gathers data from those lenders where loans are offered and drawn. The SNP has said that publishing limited information on the scheme will hugely underestimate the number who can't access the emergency loans and make the percentage of companies who are successful seem a lot better than it is, making it difficult to assess if the scheme is working. And Roger, this is it seems like a fairly obvious bit of data that you would want to collect, given that as this says, we're only getting news about how many have been accepted, and we're not hearing how many are being rejected. It's really impossible to tell how the scheme's working under those circumstances, isn't
it? Well, I think that's right. And also, what we don't know because of that, we can't go deeper and know what is the reason that they're being rejected, which is what I would be really interested in. I mean, so I've got every sympathy with what Owen has been trying to do. I mean, there has been, for goodness knows how many decades, a problem of transparency related to the financial sector in the UK. And so I think, and I'm disappointed, but I'm not terribly surprised that there's not all the kind of information we want to be made public, being made public, so that we can discuss and so that we can dig deeper. But my main concern would be if people are making claims that are being rejected, is to know exactly what are the grounds for rejection. Why are some companies being given access and other companies not? I think that's in the wider public interest. It's in policy interest to know what is going on.
Yeah. And moving back to Scotland, the Scottish Government has announced a one-off £75 million increase in funding for Scotland's universities to ensure they can protect their world-leading research programmes against the financial impact of COVID-19. The intervention will help secure the jobs and training needed to support ongoing and future research work, meaning institutions can concentrate fully on planning the long-term future of a sector that has become vital to the Scottish economy. Universities will also be expected to adapt and to use their own resources as well as the packages of support for businesses provided by the UK government to counter the effects of the pandemic on their research operations. The new funding will replace lost research income, protect research jobs, and help universities focus more effort on the high priority research needed to fight the outbreak and to support society and the economy post-COVID-19. Richard Lochhead, the Minister for Further Education, Higher Education and Science, has now written to his UK government counterpart, Michelle Donnellan, who's Minister of State for Universities, calling for a UK investment and support package for higher education, including additional financial support for universities to ensure they and their graduates can continue to play a key role in the UK's economic and social recovery from the pandemic. And Chris, this has got to be welcome. Obviously, everybody is under pressure during this crisis, but universities are struggling with just the fact that people can't be in the labs doing the research necessarily while they're trying to maintain their physical distance.
Yeah, and we are seeing a new phase of where remote working is actually being relatively successful. But again, we have to recognise the fact that even although people are, remotely working in their own houses, they still need paid, and that research still needs funding as well. And it's well to point out again that this money will be, if I could use the tone of doubly welcome, seeing as how that the universities are struggling with the lack of Erasmus students that are coming over, and obviously their money is missing out of the universities going forward into the following semesters. So, again, the Scottish Government are, dare I say, getting on with the day job and, realising the fullness of potential within our wonderful universities and, supporting them. Because basically they've got no recourse for funds. And I think I'm right in saying that because this money is actually Scottish money, it won't be boosted by the usual Barnett consequentials. So I think that's possibly where Richard Lochhead is going to ask his English counterpart, if there's anything coming forward from down south in order to top it up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And our final story, which I'm sure, Chris, you will have a lot to say about. As part of the next emergency coronavirus legislation, the Scottish Government is proposing an additional £19.2 million investment in carers allowance supplement. This is in recognition of the additional pressure that carers are under as a result of the ongoing pandemic. If approved by Parliament, around 83,000 eligible carers will get an extra £230.10 through a special one-off coronavirus carers allowance supplement in June. As with the current supplement, they will not need to do anything to get this extra payment, as it will be paid automatically to people in receipt of carers allowance. This would mean that carers receive an additional £690.30 this year on top of their carers allowance and any other income. This supplement is not paid in the rest of the UK. Cabinet Secretary for Social Security, Shirley-Anne Somerville, said, "We introduced the carers allowance supplement to recognise the important contribution that unpaid carers play in our society. They provide vital support to family, friends and neighbours. Our collective efforts to slow the spread of coronavirus will see many of these carers experiencing additional pressures, particularly financial, right now. The payment will benefit carers who are on low incomes and already have some of the most intense caring roles, providing at least 35 hours unpaid care weekly to a disabled child or adult in receipt of higher level disability benefits. This additional payment would be an acknowledgement to carers that we know that you're doing even more right now, and we thank you." And Chris, we've talked again. You are an unpaid carer yourself, and so this would be, you would presumably be eligible for this extra wee bump in payment. What do you make of this announcement from Shirley-Anne Somerville?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's in stark contrast to how the UK government treats unpaid carers. The harsh number that I'm going to throw at you now, Kenny, is going to make your eyes water. The unpaid carers in the UK actually save the UK government a staggering 132 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
That is basically the cost of a second NHS.
Yeah.
Now, what carers get paid equates to £1.86 per hour of the £264 that carers get. Obviously, dividing that figure by the 35 hours of actual care. So any top up, the two top ups that the Scottish Government already give carers in Scotland is, it was a magnanimous gesture and groundbreaking at the time. And this obviously is welcome and has to be lauded. I have one quick criticism of the Scottish Government. You said that no carers will not need to do anything about this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because the Scottish Government have already identified the 83,000 unpaid carers in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
If they can quickly identify those 83,000, then surely they could have acted sooner and independently to that 83,000 and gave them the personal protection equipment that they need in order to carry out doing their caring duties. I'm speaking from a personal
of course.
opinion on this.
Mm-hmm.
I've been struggling with my local council to get personal protection equipment to me. It's as a level criticism that and I'm not making this lightly. The carers in East Wren are absolutely fantastic. The actual carers forum in East Wren Council are fantastic. Sometimes they need to go above and beyond offering head massages and a cup of tea, and actually, get down and offer the practical things that carers actually need in order for us to continue to do our jobs.
Absolutely,
because it is a job, And this one thing that I please let me make this point. As the fact that it is a job, we didn't choose it, and don't get me wrong, but the UK government leans on carers because carers have a moral responsibility to look after the family members, and also people who are close to them. They take on that as a moral duty. So it is a job, but it is a moral duty to do it. I wouldn't have anyone else looking after my elder brother, because I know I nobody knows him better than I do. And the care package that I've got in place to support me in order to help me support my brother is fantastic. I'm not taking that away from East Wren whatsoever.
Sure.
They are wonderful people, but the government need to realise the fact that this is a full-time occupation for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that should be reciprocated, and the best way that it could be reciprocated is that if everybody was put on UBI and we could stop having these conversations as well. And it's interesting. I would love to be able to talk to Rogers about UBI. It'd be fascinating because I know he's absolutely on the ball with it.
We will just.
There's also the fact that today I was shocked to find that Willie Rennie is in favour of UBI. Heaven help us! What have we come to?
Well, we will just very quickly then come to Roger on that. And Roger, what do you make of these developments that the Scottish Government has made to the social security system specifically?
Well, I can only concur exactly with what Chris has just said about the way in which they've intervened with supplementary payments. I mean, that's to their great credit. I would be, in the longer run, very hopeful that we can find a better way of managing the types of support we give to people in the community. And I agree that one of the things we have to look much more seriously about is universal basic income. I mean, this is something that has grown. I mean, just a few weeks ago, there was quite a supportive article put out in the blog by the Fraser of Allender Institute. Mm-hmm. So this is not a concern that is only a concern of a small number of people. There are many people in society, many institutions in society think this will be the way of the future to guarantee the kind of support that people should be entitled to.
Yeah, certainly. We can only hope so. I mean, as everybody knows, I think we're all big supporters of UBI here at Broadcasting Scotland. We think it would provide innumerable benefits, but that is all we've got time for tonight. We can't go into our usual long discussion about it. I'd like to thank Chris and Roger for joining us. Always a pleasure to have both of them, and we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. The whole reason for making the shows is to provide the news to you, so thank you for watching. If you're able to support us financially, then please do. Every penny makes a difference. And if you are able to, then please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month can make a huge difference to the quantity, the quality, and the type of programmes we can produce here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, then please don't feel bad about it. We do understand that, especially during this coronavirus crisis, a lot of people's incomes are very, very stretched. We have had a lot of new supporters though, so we do welcome them. But if you're not able to, don't worry. The shows will always be free to view online, and you can still do a huge job for us by spreading the word, by letting people know where we are. You can do that on social media by just search Broadcasting Scotland on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can also, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, there are always jobs to be done, whether that's doing a bit of journalism and preparing these stories for the shows every evening, or whether it's working behind the camera or even working in front of the camera. There are always jobs to be done. There's training available, and we'd love to hear from you. Obviously, there's some limit on how many people can be in the studio right now, but as time progresses, there's always space for more people to come in, and certainly a lot of this work can be done remotely. So once again, I'd just like to thank Chris McCusker, and just one other thing I'm just getting told in my ear to remind you that the Amazon Fire Stick app is now fully functional. There was a slight problem with it just after we launched, but it is now back up and running. So if you have the Amazon Fire Stick, you can get Broadcasting Scotland through that as well now. But that is all we've got time for tonight. So once again, I'd like to thank Roger Mullen and Chris McCusker. It's always a pleasure to have them, and would like to thank you again for joining us. Gordon will be back tomorrow with another Scotland at 7, and I'll be back on Sunday with the full Scottish. But until then, have a great evening. Goodbye. Brilliant.